What's going on, guys? We are back for another edition of 10 players I am buying or selling in fantasy football. We're down to the final stretch, guys. This is it. We're about 2 weeks away from the trade deadline in most fantasy football leagues. This is when fantasy football championships are won. Nobody remembers who's in first place in October. Nobody remembers who's in first place in November. It's about who's in first place at the end of the season in December. And that's what this video is going to be all about, trying to get all of us to get to first place in our fantasy leagues. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's get right into it. All right, so we're starting off with the 3 players that I'm selling first. First off, you got to sell D'Onta Foreman. This one might seem obvious to a lot of you, but it might not seem obvious to everyone. Foreman's coming off a monster 3-touchdown game, but he was up against the Falcons defense, one of the worst run defenses in the league. Let's not forget, guys, the Panthers are still one of the worst offenses in the NFL. I'm certainly selling high on D'Onta Foreman if I can. If I can get a running back 2 or wide receiver 2 in return for D'Onta Foreman, I'm absolutely doing that. Another player I'm selling right now is DeAndre Swift, and this is specifically for all of you out there who are not a lock for the fantasy football playoffs right now. This is a really important piece of trade strategy that you got to wrap your head around at this time of the year. The Lions are not going to be in the NFL playoffs, giving them even less incentive to rush DeAndre Swift back. I'm certainly selling low on DeAndre Swift right now. If I can get a running back 2 or wide receiver 2 in return for Swift, I would do that, especially if I'm not in the fantasy football playoffs in my league right now. Another guy I'm selling in a very similar situation to DeAndre Swift is Jonathan Taylor. The offensive line for the Colts is significantly worse than last year, and they have Sam Ehlinger starting likely for the rest of the season. This Colts offense is not one to buy into. I would sell low on Jonathan Taylor, again, especially if you are not in the playoff picture in your fantasy football league right now. I would be talking to the people in first, second, third place in your league, selling them DeAndre Swift, selling them Jonathan Taylor, and doing everything you can to scrap your way into the fantasy football playoffs, because from there, anything can happen. Now is the time to buy AMON-RA St. Brown. Last year, he averaged the second most fantasy points per game among receivers in the last 5 games that he played without TJ Hawkinson. And DeAndre Swift, like we already mentioned, is also not fully healthy. AMON-RA St. Brown is going to ball for the remainder of the season. He has an extremely high floor, an extremely high ceiling. I think he profiles as a top 10 wide receiver for the rest of the season, and you can almost definitely get him for a lower price than that right now. So go buy AMON-RA St. Brown. Next up, you got to be sending trade offers for Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk has topped 40 yards just once in the last 4 games. Christian Kirk has one of the better schedules for the rest of the season. It gets much easier from here on out. His usage puts him close to the elite tier of wide receivers, but you can get him right now for closer to a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 cost. I'm absolutely buying Christian Kirk right now, and he does have league-winning upside. Get Christian Kirk before it's too late. All right, this next one's going to be really difficult to actually execute, but I have to put him in here because there's a very good chance Derrick Henry is going to win fantasy leagues this year. It feels like we do this every single year, but once again, Derrick Henry has, by far, the best running back schedule in the fantasy football playoffs. He has a long history of dominating defenses when it gets really cold out down the stretch of the NFL season. Derrick Henry has maybe the best chance among all players in the NFL to win fantasy football leagues. Again, it's going to be really hard to get him, but these are the types of players you want to be paying up for, the guys that have a real chance to bring home the fantasy football championship for you. So I'm buying Derrick Henry. I would be willing to give up a lot to get him. He is going to be a beast down the stretch if he stays healthy. Another player I'm buying, this time at the wide receiver position, is Tyler Boyd. Regardless of how long Ja'Marr Chase is out, people are really sleeping on Tyler Boyd. The bottom line is he's been much better than he is perceived to be this season. Tyler Boyd has a high floor, high ceiling. You can get him at a low-end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 price tag. In reality, he's a high-end wide receiver 2, maybe even a low-end wide receiver 1 over the next games without Ja'Marr Chase. I am buying Tyler Boyd, and he also has a pretty solid schedule for the remainder of the season. Another player I'm buying right now is Lamar Jackson. And look, I don't want to be paying up too much to get a quarterback in fantasy football because you can go add a guy like Justin Fields in a lot of leagues for completely free. But there is not a quarterback in the NFL with a better fantasy football playoff schedule than Lamar Jackson. He gets the Steelers, the Browns, and the Falcons, all of which are top 10 matchups for quarterbacks so far this fantasy season. You don't want to overpay for a quarterback, but if you're going to, Lamar Jackson is your guy. He gives you the high ceiling, high floor with his rushing upside, and hopefully some of his weapons are back and healthy by the fantasy football playoffs. Speaking of hoping that Lamar Jackson's weapons are back and healthy for the fantasy football playoffs, a tight end that I'm buying is absolutely Mark Andrews. And this is especially for those of you out there that are locked in to the fantasy football playoffs already. Mark Andrews is really in a tier of his own alongside Travis Kelce at the tight end position. He's giving you wide receiver 1 numbers in your tight end slot. So now is the time to buy low on Mark Andrews. And he is one of the few, maybe only one of the 2 tight ends that have real league-winning upside. And if you can stack Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews together, oh man, don't even get me started. That is a true league-winning upside stack right there for your fantasy run. You got to be buying Chris Godwin. Tom Brady's only thrown 9 touchdowns this season, which is crazy to think that that's the case after a season where he threw 43 touchdowns, which led the NFL last year. Chris Godwin, 0 touchdowns heading into week 9. He is bound to find the end zone sooner rather than later. And with this elite volume he's seeing in one of the most pass-heavy offenses in the NFL, he's close to a back-end wide receiver 1 in fantasy. You can get him for much, much cheaper than that right now. And he also has one of the best remaining schedules for wide receivers in the NFL. Buy Chris Godwin before it's too late. There you have it. Those are the 10 players I'm buying and selling right now as we approach the fantasy football trade deadline that are going to help you win or avoid losing fantasy football championships. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss more videos like this every single week. And as always, time is the most valuable thing we have. So thank you for spending some time with me today. Have a good one.